Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I do have to say my disclaimer. The views that you might hear from the guest may not represent those of the station or the host. Always consult your primary care physician about any medical advice. Folks, I am excited today, as I am every time I interview someone. Today is really phenomenal to me. Every guest is phenomenal, but this topic just touches me. And I'm going to tell you about my guest. My guest today is James Geraghty. He is author and writer of the book, Inside the Orphan Drug Revolution, The Promise of Patient-Centered Biotechnology. James Geraghty has been the director of 8 NASDAQ-listed biotech companies and chair of 5. He's worked on orphan drugs for over 40 years as a strategy consultant, a CEO, a leader of pioneering and international operations at Genzyme, and a venture entrepreneur. Welcome, James Geraghty, to Chatting with Betsy. I feel so honored and privileged to have you as my guest.
Well, thank you, Betsy. It's an honor and a privilege for me to join you.
Oh, thank you so much. I always ask every author, what motivated you to write your book, James? You don't mind if I call you James, do you? Or I'd rather be called Jim? It's up to you.
I answer to both.
Okay.
It's a great question to start with, Betsy. And I would say, in a nutshell, there were 2 reasons. One is I've been privileged to be a small part of this orphan drug revolution for 40 years. And I've been inspired by the amazing physicians, scientists, entrepreneurs, parents, family members, patients who have brought incredible new treatments to life and to market. And I thought their stories, which have inspired me, deserve to be told and that other people would enjoy hearing them. And the second reason is that the orphan drug revolution is at risk of being taken for granted. And all of the benefits that it has brought forward are under threat all the time from policymakers and certain special interests that are looking to reduce costs or protect their own interests. And if the people, if the public isn't informed and doesn't speak up, then all the investment and all the support that's necessary to continue to develop these drugs and make them available to patients could be lost.
Well, speaking of, that's something I encourage everyone to do, James. Speak up and be an advocate. For those who don't know, I'm not familiar in the audience, can you explain what an orphan drug is?
I'm happy to. And most of your listeners probably have that same question, so it's a great place to start. The answer is, first of all, an orphan drug is a drug for an orphan disease. Right? And an orphan disease is a rare disease, and they're called orphan diseases because they were orphaned by the pharmaceutical companies, which didn't think it could make a profit off such rare diseases and stopped and didn't put any money into developing treatments for them. And as a result, 40 years ago, there was a law passed that's called the Orphan Drug Act in the United States, which defines orphan diseases specifically as those which afflict fewer than 200,000 people in America, which can sound like a lot, but in the 400 million people in America, 200,000 is less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1%. So that's how rare orphan diseases are defined in America.
Wow. And some of these diseases, James, I know ALS, muscular dystrophy. What are some of the other ones that are considered rare? I mean, I know there's a lot of rare diseases out there.
There are a lot. There are sometimes said to be as many as 7,000, and we'll come back to that.
Wow.
But ones that are known that people would recognize that have become famous in one way or another, one would certainly be hemophilia, which was widely known as kind of the royal disease because it was afflicted the royal families of Europe. You mentioned muscular dystrophy. That was made famous in America 50 years ago by Jerry Lewis and the Jerry Telethons. ALS, you mentioned, was known to many people for many years as Lou Gehrig's disease. Other diseases that are well known, people might be interested to hear. The most common genetic disease among Caucasian populations is cystic fibrosis, and the most common genetic disease among African American populations is sickle cell anemia. So those are both pretty widely known as well.
Yeah, sickle cell anemia, I have heard of that. Cystic fibrosis, I've interviewed someone whose daughter has that, and I actually worked with someone who has cystic fibrosis many years ago, and the advances that they have made in that cystic fibrosis is just incredible, that they are now living longer. And I'm sure, are there orphan drugs for very rare cancers?
There are as well, yes, for sure. As you know, cancer, which, we used to think of as kind of one big monolithic thing, cancer is increasingly understood to be a collection of many different, kind of rare diseases. And yes, many forms of cancer qualify as orphan diseases as well.
And I have to ask you this, James, because I know how expensive new medications are. For instance, I won't say the name of what I'm taking, but I just happen to get samples from my doctor because I can't afford it for a medication that prevents migraines. And I'm going to be going on Medicare, right, starting next month. And the guy who helped me get my prescription plan, he said, no, that's new. It costs $1,100 a month. So I like to know, with these orphan drugs, are they subsidized? How does a person afford it?
That's a very important question, Betsy. It's a question people always ask. And the answer is, first of all, these drugs cost hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, over $1 billion by some estimates, and most of them fail. And so somehow, the cost and the risk of all those failures has to be covered. And so when you divide that by the relatively small number of patients, a few thousand or a few hundred patients with these diseases, the price, when people hear the price of the drugs, they have a sticker shock. And the price of these drugs is often in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, $200,000, $300,000. So people hear that and they say, well, how can anybody afford that? And the answer is, any FDA-approved drug is required to be covered by insurance policies. And today, 95% of people in America have insurance, and the 5% who don't qualify for patient assistance programs. So the real issue for people, and even with the drug you talked about, but certainly for these expensive drugs, the real issue for people is, what is their insurance company charging them in terms of their out-of-pocket costs, their copays, and their deductibles? And it's managing those out-of-pocket expenses under the insurance policies that's really what's necessary to allow ordinary patients and families to get access to these drugs.
Yes, and I know, like now going on Medicare, because I'll be 65 next week, can't believe it, they don't cover certain medications. And if they're new, they don't cover. And then, of course, the out-of-pocket, which I really would like to see new medications. I'm very happy when there's a new medication available. I just wish it could be made affordable, although there are some drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, that do have coupons sometimes or will give you a patient a break, some kind of subsidy. It depends on the company. And how can the public, Joe and public, what can they do, because I'm very big on advocacy, to make sure that this won't go away, that they will continue to have orphan drugs to help people who have rare diseases? Because you know what, folks, unless you see someone suffer going through a disease, you don't know what it's like. And we are always grasping for straws, and we want cures. So I just want to know because I'm big on advocacy and education.
Yeah, no, that's a very important part of the equation here. And I know you're involved in this, Betsy, and today almost every disease, even rare and very rare diseases, patients and families want to find other people, other families, suffering from the same conditions, right? So there are patient organizations for almost every rare genetic disease. And today, they're very connected through the internet and social media, of course, and they work to find ways to develop therapies for drugs, and they work to provide access. So they get connected, and they get connected through there's some big national organizations like a group called NORD in Washington, D.C., or a group called Global Genes in California that bring together these small individual patient communities into a large patient community. And they are very effective. They reach out. There's a day every year called Rare Disease Day when these organizations come together to go to Capitol Hill or go to their state legislature and advocate for the policies that are necessary. So people can get involved in those through a particular disease that afflicts their family or on behalf of friends with Alzheimer's or other diseases. You don't have to have the disease to join the advocacy group.
That's terrific. I love to hear news about how people can get involved in a call to action to the audience. What is near and dear to my heart, hope I don't get verklempt when I talk about it, is Alzheimer's. As I said before I started recording, that I know that there's a new drug, can't pronounce the name of it, begins with the letter L, that they want to put out, that it's showing some promise, but only in the early stages. What do you see for the future of medications with Alzheimer's? Will there ever be something? I mean, this disease is 116 years old, and there's no cure.
No, that's exactly right. And it's a huge issue. It's a huge, of course, problem in America. As you know well, of course, many older Americans suffer from it. And there are a couple of things I would say in terms of hope. Number one is that, like with cancer, which was, first thought to be just one thing and is now understood, as you said, to be many different subtypes, there are many different subtypes of Alzheimer's. And I think you mentioned, Betsy, early onset Alzheimer's. And early onset Alzheimer's is generally now understood to be a certain form of a genetic defect that's been identified for early onset Alzheimer's. And that's a rare disease. And so as scientists work to understand ways to treat the genetic type of Alzheimer's, that opens up doors and insights into how do we treat the more prevalent form of Alzheimer's. And some of these genetic therapies now, there are people looking at, what is sometimes called the holy grail in medicine. Today, most therapies that people take for most diseases, even when they work well, they have to be taken chronically for a lifetime, every day, every week, every month. But these genetic therapies that are now being developed, because they give patients the gene that makes the protein they need, they work for a lifetime. So a one-time administration offers the promise of a lifetime of therapy. And that's really, I think, the hope that many people have as to how Alzheimer's will really be treated effectively today.
That is interesting. Thank you for answering that. I know that, that they thought it was the tangles, the plaques. Some people think it's inflammation. They say that changes could start in the brain 10 to 20 years prior to diagnosis. It's mind-blowing, and as more people are aging, the baby boomers, I'm one of them, the fear of getting Alzheimer's is tremendous, and they say it's going to be, if not already, a global epidemic. My husband was only 56 when he was diagnosed. He was the first one to get it young in his family, but his mom, his grandma, his aunts and uncles on his mom's side, brothers and sisters, all had it at their elderly age, like 80 and up. So I really do hope for a cure, especially for my son, who is at very high risk of getting Alzheimer's. I'd like to know, James, about stem cell research. Is that still going on, and would that help solve some of these mysteries of some of these illnesses, these diseases?
It is still going on, and there is some hope in those areas. I would say today, from the people that I listen to and the things I read and people I think are leaders in the field, I think most people today hope that these genetic therapies have a greater promise of working. And I would say, Betsy, to the thing you just mentioned about, families, scientists are particularly interested in meeting with and working with families that have these conditions, particularly these early onset forms where they can learn about them. And one thing, I encourage everybody to do, as people are doing in cancer now, is to look for clinical trials. And even before a drug is approved, there are hospitals and doctors and companies that are organizing trials of promising therapies. And, people have to look and they have to read and understand, and these haven't been approved yet. So they're not guaranteed to work, but they have great promise of working. And that's I think, one of the best ways for people to get hope and access to therapy and the promise of a therapy that can work early on in their course.
Yes, clinical trials. I actually did a show about that. I think it was this summer. I spoke to someone who had Alzheimer's, and she is in a clinical trial. Unfortunately, was it 10 years ago? Yeah. Or is it 12? Well, 2010 is when Matt was diagnosed. They didn't have that many clinical trials going on, and it was too far, and Matt didn't want to do that. But even the doctors, they didn't even suggest that. I guess there really wasn't much going on in 2010. Of course, there is now, and I would encourage people out there. You could check a government website. I had it on before, but my mind just went blank.
It's clinicaltrials.gov.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Clinicaltrials.gov. Thank you so much. My mind went blank. And to join, speak about it with your family or your doctor, and see that's something that you want to do that will eventually help other people. I just can't say how important, that is. And I'd like to know, James, what breakthroughs do you see on the horizon? I know you spoke about gene therapy. There's the stem cell. What do you see in your crystal ball?
Well, those are among them. There's another technology that's recently been developed that people are, very hopeful about. It's called gene editing, which is slightly different than gene therapy. Instead of kind of giving people a new gene, it's a way of kind of fixing the damaged gene. And, some of your readers may have read about a great book that recently came out. Walter Isaacson wrote a book called The Code Breaker, which is about the woman who won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of gene editing. And gene editing is being tested in many diseases now, including Alzheimer's, and is another, maybe even kind of like a next generation gene therapy.
Wow, gene editing. Now, do they go in and, I know it's like a silly question, and fix a gene?
Yeah, that's right. They administer a drug which is specifically designed to repair the genetic code or to fix errors in the genetic code.
Oh, wow. That sounds exciting.
It is.
I have to write this down because it's very interesting. That gives me hope for my son's generation. My son is 38. And being from my husband's family and my family, my father had Alzheimer's. My brother, he was 67 when he died, but he was already showing signs of dementia, undiagnosed, but he was having memory issues. And, you wonder how much does hereditary genes play into this. And, some people say, oh, no, it's not hereditary. And then some people say, yes, it is hereditary. And it's just as fascinating to me. I know you have a lot of stories in your book about people who have touched you. Can you tell about a story about one of the individuals in your book who has touched you that had a rare disease?
There are so many, Betsy, and they start with Abby Myers, who the book starts with, and Abby Myers is sometimes called the mother of the orphan drug revolution. Had a son with a genetic disease, and a drug company wouldn't provide the drug she needed, and she went to Washington and got a congressman, Henry Waxman, and they got the Orphan Drug Act passed. And then just to kind of fast forward, a long distance and a way away, just to show you the orphan drug revolution is a global revolution. I sometimes tell the story of a young girl I met in India who came from a very poor family. At the age of 8, she was diagnosed with a genetic disease called Pompe disease, and her first child in India ever to get therapy for it. Her parents, they gave up everything. They moved. They lived in a tiny little one-room apartment. And then when I had the privilege of visiting them one day, and you think, well, gee, this is such a tragic situation. And when you talk to them, like so many parents and families I talk to in these situations, their story was so inspiring. And what they say is they don't feel sorry for themselves. They say they want to help other families. They want to make sure that they turn what happened to their daughter into some good for the world. And so they're going to find a way to educate other parents and get therapies available for other families. And that kind of dedication, I mean, that's what makes me continue in this field after 40 years, because how can you not, love and be moved by people who are that passionate and that selfless?
Yes, that just touches me, because you know what? That is so true. I'll tell you, James, I'll tell the audience, there is nothing like a mother's and father's love for a child, and, to advocate for your child of what they need. And, yes, you can fight City Hall and the government, because when you want a cure for your child, I don't think anything's going to stop you from that.
I'll give you a story about that, Betsy. Your listeners will smile, but I remember many years ago when I was with Genzyme, which was one of the pioneering companies in this field, and I had the privilege of leading Genzyme in Europe and helping educate and introduce these drugs to families and regulators in Europe. There was first drug was just becoming available, and there wasn't much of it available, and people had to decide, which patients are going to get it. And there was one mother who was so passionate about ensuring that she got therapy for her child that she went to the gate of the front door of the office of the Minister of Health, and she handcuffed herself to the door. And she said she wasn't going to leave until her son got therapy. And you know what? The next day, her son got the therapy.
Yes. Oh, that just, I'm going to tear up. If that doesn't touch you folks, I don't know, then you don't have a heart, because that's what I'm talking about, James. That fire, that passion, and I can understand their motivation. They want to help other people, because unless someone goes through something, people don't understand. Being that I went through seeing my loved ones die from Alzheimer's, I'm passionate about Alzheimer's. I want there to be a cure. And my passion led me to go in my car, where I was discovered by Jeannie White, who's the station manager, Passion World Talk Radio. And the reason for my show, James, one of the many reasons for my show, is to provide people with resources so they can educate themselves and know that they're not alone. And your book, you and your book, are a wonderful resource to find out the information, the history of orphan drugs, what's going on, and how people can be helped, and, just a call to action that people can get involved. And that just inspires me. What you said just put me on fire. Just inspires me.
We all get inspired by the people who are so passionate in this field, right, Betsy? And those are the ones who've inspired me and kept me in this for 40 years. And I I'm not surprised to hear that they're the same kinds that have inspired you.
Yes, that's definitely. You know, when you are around people who you see dying from this disease and dying young, you know, like people think, James, you know, a myth that, oh, only the old people get Alzheimer's. No, there are younger people getting it all the time. And we do need a cure for this disease and many other diseases. And when you see people suffering with this, you do want a cure. It does light your passion. And I will never stop talking about Alzheimer's until either I can't talk or I die, whichever one comes first. I will continue to be here and to tell people and to hopefully inspire people. James, you are so interesting to talk to. Is there anything else you would like to say about the orphan drug revolution or your book?
Well, you've asked great questions, Betsy, and it's been a pleasure talking with you about them. I think I would say that, you know, I encourage people, as you say, to learn more, to read about these kinds of conditions and to talk to people. You know, I think sometimes in our society there was a tradition that people turned away from these diseases. You know, again, there's a lot of analogies to cancer, and you'll remember back in the day when people wouldn't talk about cancer. Before Betty Ford, right, went on television talking about breast cancer, nobody would say those words because it was like a black mark or an embarrassment. And sometimes that still happens with genetic diseases. You know, people see a child in a wheelchair, or they see a person who obviously has a kind of a disability, and we look away. And instead of looking away, if we embrace those people and engage them and learn about, you know, their condition and their lives, then we learn things that inspire us, and that gets people involved to say, this is something important that I want to be part of and I want to contribute to. And that's how these things get continued.
Oh, you are so right, James. I remember the Jerry Lewis marathons. Well, I've watched that since I was a child.
Right. And that brought that inspired all kinds of research, and that was part of what drove, you know, so many people to do the work that ultimately led to the therapies today for muscular dystrophy, for ALS, for cystic fibrosis, and all the other diseases you talked about.
Yes, and I remember, you know, when ALS wasn't talked about, and now it's getting talked about, and they're, you know, working on finding a cure. I think a new medication just came out for that too.
It was just approved. Many people will remember the Ice Bucket Challenge. Many of your listeners might have participated in the Ice Bucket Challenge, and that's a great example. You know, the funding from the Ice Bucket Challenge is part of what led to the development of this therapy that, as you said, was the first ever therapy just approved by the FDA for ALS.
Yes, this is why advocacy, James, I have a saying, you know, we have to show our journeys. The cancer, I call it the revolution, but that started because people who had cancer said, we're not taking this anymore. We want to be treated. We want cures. AIDS, the people who had AIDS, they came out and they said, we want a cure. We want a treatment. And I say for people who have any kind of dementia, come out of the dementia closet and shine a light on your loved one, and let's personalize this disease with the name and the face. I've been saying this for years, James.
No, you're absolutely right, Betsy. The AIDS activism, ACT UP, and you know those other groups, and the protests, and the people who put themselves out there, they changed the FDA, they changed the industry, and they've changed lives for all of us now. And you know, there's a saying in the rare disease world in medicine, you know, treasure your exceptions, and to really cherish the people who have unique conditions, because we have so much to learn from them if we study them and care for them appropriately.
That's true, very true. I can say this, that going through, I never even heard of Alzheimer's when my mother-in-law was diagnosed in 2000, and I worked as a licensed practical nurse, but back in the Stone Age, they didn't call it Alzheimer's, they called it by other names. And when I didn't even know that you could get Alzheimer's in your, at any time in your 40s or 50s when Matt was diagnosed. And it was a battle because the doctors at that time, James, said, he's too young. But he wasn't. And what's my train of thought here? But I just think that we need to be an advocate and show our journeys. And this is why it's so important for people, especially if you have any kind of dementia. If you're out in the audience and you hear me, come to my show. Speak about what you're going through. Are you on a clinical trial? Come on my show and talk about it if it's helped you. We need to hear from people. We learn from people's stories. And I just want to encourage the audience, don't ever be ashamed of yourself if you have a disease or your loved one, because, we shouldn't be ashamed. And, Alzheimer's used to be, whispered, and some people still have a stigma. Loved ones abandon us, and I guess they're afraid it might be catchy. I don't know, or the fear. They don't know how to speak to somebody. You know what? Embrace your loved one. If you know someone who has any type of illness, don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid. Love them. Love up on them. That's when they need you the most. That's when they need your love the most. And I just want to encourage the audience to do that. And I want to thank you, James Geraghty, for coming on, for writing your book, for doing all the work that you've done for 40 years and are continuing to do. I can't thank you enough. And could you please tell us where people can buy your book? I know you're on Amazon.com. Is there anywhere else?
Sure. Well, first of all, Betsy, those were beautiful closing comments, and you said so well there really why I did write the book, and that was a beautiful summation. It was just beautiful to listen to, so thank you.
You're welcome.
So I would say for people who want to find the book, it's on Amazon, and if people want to just Google the book and get connected, there's a website that's just ORPHANDrugRevolution.com. ORPHANDrugRevolution.com is the easiest way to get connected.
Oh, thank you so much, James Geraghty. Folks, get involved. Buy the book Inside the Orphan Drug Revolution, The Promise of Patient-Centered Biotechnology. You know what, folks? I always say, by the grace of God, go I. Nobody knows when they could get a rare disease. Nobody. And you would want help. You would want people to be compassionate and to have empathy for you or your loved one. No one is immune to anything happening to them. Trust me on that one. And I just can't thank you enough, James Geraghty, for everything that you are doing to make this world a better place and educating people on orphan drugs and rare diseases. I thank you so much. And I want to thank...
Those were, again, beautiful comments. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. I want to thank Jeannie White, who's station manager, who writes the blog, produces the show. Please read the blog because it will have information on how you can buy the book and get in touch with James Geraghty and get involved. And I would like to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. I want to thank you, the listeners. Please share this show to help other people. And if you are looking for a support group, I have one, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement. You do not have to be a caregiver. You do not have to have Alzheimer's. We welcome all walks of life, all dementias. So if you are a caregiver and you're struggling, please join my group. You can follow me on Facebook at Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And it is free to subscribe to Chatting with Betsy on iHeart, Spreaker, Spotify, Amazon Music. And I always end with, as you know, folks, in a world where you could be anything, to please be kind, shine your light bright, because if we were all kind and shined our light bright, this would be a more peaceful, brighter world to live in. And I just want to thank everyone for listening. I can't believe it's going to be December tomorrow, but today is the last day of November, so I want to give a shout-out for all the caregivers. It is National Family Caregiving Month, also National Alzheimer's Awareness Month. Thank you caregivers, past and present, for what you have done and what you continue to do. I salute you as I'm going to get for former caregiver, and I'm still a caregiver, as you all know, to my son Josh. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a happy holiday or peaceful one. Till we chat again, this is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.